Imagine a flock of lambs grazing in an open field. Suddenly, a great bird of prey crosses the sky and snatches one of them away. The lambs, terrified, gather together and begin to judge the bird. "What an evil being," they say. "What a cruel and wicked creature." And they conclude among themselves, "To be a bird of prey is evil. Therefore the opposite of that, to be a meek and harmless lamb, must be good. We, who snatch no one away, are the good ones. They, who have talons and fly high, are the evil ones." This little parable was written by Friedrich Nietzsche, and it hides one of the most disturbing ideas in all of philosophy, because, look closely, there is a subtle and devastating detail in the lamb's reasoning. They turned their own incapacity into a virtue. They do not refrain from snatching because they chose kindness. They do not snatch because they cannot. They have no talons, no wings, no strength. And instead of admitting their own weakness, they rebranded it. They called weakness kindness, and they called the strength of the other evil. Today we are going to ask a question that can deeply disturb you. What if much of what you call kindness was precisely that? Weakness disguised as virtue, well-mannered fear, cowardice that learned to call itself morality. Before I continue, I need to be very clear, because this is a point where Nietzsche is constantly misunderstood. This is not a defense of cruelty. Nietzsche is not telling you to become a monster, to step on others, or to abandon all compassion. On the contrary, what he is doing is something far more subtle. He wants to separate true kindness, the kind that springs from the strength and generosity of someone who has plenty, from false kindness, the kind that springs from fear, cowardice, and hidden resentment. If you came to this video hoping I would validate your image of being a good person, it might be better to close it now. Because what comes next is an uncomfortable mirror. But if you have the courage to question even your virtues, to discover whether your kindness is nobility or just fear, then stay. Nietzsche has 7 dark truths about kindness. They will not comfort you. They will force you to face whether you are good by choice or only out of cowardice. And maybe that is one of the hardest questions you have ever asked yourself, because it threatens the very thing you are most proud of. First truth: not all kindness is virtue. Much of it is just fear with good manners. The first thing Nietzsche forces us to admit is that the word kindness hides very different things. There is the kindness of someone who helps because they have strength, resources, and overflowing generosity. And there is the kindness of someone who does not react, does not confront, does not assert themselves simply because they are afraid. And these two things, although they look identical from the outside, are opposites on the inside. Think about how many times you were kind, not because you wanted to be, but because you didn't have the courage to say no. How many times you swallowed an insult and called it patience, when in reality it was fear of conflict. How many times you gave in, agreed, lowered your head, and then convinced yourself that it was humility, when, deep down, it was pure lack of courage to take a stand. Nietzsche saw in this one of the greatest deceptions a human being plays on themselves. It is far more comfortable for the ego to believe we are peaceful and kind people than to admit that, in many moments, we are just cowards who didn't have the courage to act. Kindness, in those cases, is not a virtue we choose. It is a disguise we put over our own weakness. The first truth is uncomfortable,
Before being proud of your kindness, ask yourself honestly, am I being good because I chose to, having the power to act otherwise?
Or am I being nice because, deep down, I am afraid of the consequences of asserting myself? The answer to that question separates two people who look identical from the outside, but who are opposite abysses on the inside. One is generous, the other is just scared. And confusing the two is the most subtle way of lying to yourself. To you watching, if you have ever caught yourself calling patience what was just fear of confrontation, write one single word in the comments: mask. Whoever writes it knows exactly what I am talking about, and whoever reads it will understand that recognizing this is not condemning yourself. It is the first step to changing. Second truth. The morality of the weak was born from resentment. Here we arrive at Nietzsche's boldest idea, developed in his work on the genealogy of morals. He proposed a disturbing historical theory about the origin of our values. According to him, the virtues we cherish were not always considered virtues. There was a great inversion of values in history, and it happened for a very specific reason: resentment. Nietzsche distinguished two kinds of morality. On one side, the morality of the strong, of the noble, of those who had vitality, power, and self-confidence. For them, good meant noble, strong, full of life, capable of affirming themselves. Bad was simply the opposite: the weak, the fearful, the petty. It was a morality that sprang from abundance, from the overflow of strength. But on the other side stood the weak, the powerless, those who could not affirm life with the same force. And these, unable to defeat the strong in action, found a brilliant and silent revenge. To defeat them in values, they flipped the table. They said, to be strong, proud, and powerful is evil, is sin. And to be weak, humble, submissive, and suffering is good, is virtue. It was the revenge of the powerless, carried out not with their hands, but with their concepts. This inversion was, for Nietzsche, one of the greatest turning points in human history. The weak did not admit their own weakness. They turned it into a moral medal, and they convinced even the strong to feel guilty for their own strength. The second truth is revealing. Many of the values you consider sacred and obvious may have been born not from pure wisdom, but from the resentment of someone who couldn't bear the strength of others and needed to find a way to condemn it. This doesn't mean all those values are false. It means something more subtle, that you should examine the origin of what you believe instead of accepting it blindly. Because a value born from resentment carries, hidden within it, the poison of the one who created it. And living by that value without realizing it is to continue someone else's revenge inside yourself. Third truth. You call humility what is often just a lack of courage. The word humility is one of the noblest in our vocabulary. And indeed, there is a genuine humility, that of the giant who bows, that of the strong person who knows how to acknowledge their own limits without ceasing to be strong. But Nietzsche forces us into an uncomfortable suspicion. How many times is what we call humility just the pretty name we give to our cowardice? Think carefully. When you don't defend your idea in a meeting, is it humility or fear of exposing yourself? When you accept being treated with less respect than you deserve, is it humility or a lack of courage to demand your place. When you diminish yourself, fade away, stay silent in the face of injustice, is it virtue, or simply the safest path, the one that protects you from the risk of fighting? Nietzsche deeply distrusted those who made a big show of their own humility, because often false humility hides two things. First, fear. It is safer to lower yourself than to risk being knocked down. And second, paradoxically, a secret pride. Look how humble I am, how much better than those arrogant people. False humility is, deep down, a vanity dressed up as modesty. The third truth is a blow. Before bragging about your humility, ask yourself whether it comes from a strength that chooses not to show off, or from a fear that does not dare to assert itself. The difference between the two is the difference between greatness and cowardice. And it is a difference only you can see, because it lives in the hidden motive behind your gesture, in a place where no one else can look. Fourth truth. Guilt is the weapon with which the weak tame the strong. This is perhaps the most subtle and most disturbing truth of all. Nietzsche realized that, once the morality of the weak had won, it needed a tool to stay in power and control those who were naturally stronger, more vital, more expansive. And that tool was guilt. Think about how it works. Someone full of life, ambitious, who wants to grow, conquer, stand out, is constantly taught to feel guilty for it. You want a lot? What greed! You're proud of your achievements? What arrogance! You put yourself first sometimes? What selfishness! The strong person is bombarded with accusations that make them feel there is something wrong, dirty, sinful in their own strength. And what is the result? The strong person learns to hold back, to apologize for their own existence, to dim their own light so as not to bother anyone. They are tamed. The weak, who could not win in an open contest of strength, win by installing inside the strong person an internal watchman, the bad conscience, permanent guilt. It is the most efficient chain ever invented, because it is invisible, and the victim themselves carries it willingly. The fourth truth is liberating. Notice when people make you feel guilty for wanting more, for asserting yourself, for valuing yourself. Ask yourself whether that guilt is really yours, or whether it was installed in you by people who benefit from keeping you small and controllable. Notice that healthy guilt exists. It appears when you truly hurt someone, and it serves to correct you. But the guilt Nietzsche denounced is another, the one that makes you apologize for simply existing with strength, for taking up space, for desiring. That guilt corrects nothing. It only shrinks you. And learning to tell one from the other is one of the most liberating acts of adult life. Fifth truth. Saying yes to everything is a form of cowardice. We live in an age that celebrates the person who is always available, who never refuses a request, who says yes to everyone. That person is called generous, helpful, good. But Nietzsche would raise a red flag here, because saying yes to everything, most of the time, is not generosity. It is the inability to say no, and that inability has a name: cowardice. Think about the person who can't refuse anything. Behind that apparent kindness, there is almost always a deep fear. Fear of disappointing, fear of being rejected, fear of not being loved, fear of the conflict a no might create. The person says yes, not because they want to help, but because they can't bear the anguish of saying no. They sacrifice their own limits, their own time, their own sanity, all to avoid the discomfort of taking a stand. Nietzsche enormously valued the ability to say no. For him, one true and firm no is worth more than 1,000 cowardly yeses. Because someone who only knows how to say yes has, in reality, no center of their own. They are a leaf carried by the wind of other people's wills. The strength to affirm your own life begins, paradoxically, in the courage to deny, to refuse, to draw a line and say, this far and no further. The fifth truth demands courage. Your yes only has value if you are capable of saying no. Without that ability, your supposed kindness is just the absence of a backbone, disguised as generosity. Only someone who can deny can truly affirm. Think of a person who praises everyone equally. Their praise is worthless, because they would praise anything. The same goes for the yes. When someone is incapable of refusing, their consent loses all meaning, because there is no choice behind it. The freedom to say no is what gives weight and truth to everything you say yes to. Sixth truth. There is a kindness that comes from strength, not from fear. Now the moment has come to balance the scale, because Nietzsche was not preaching that we should abandon all kindness. On the contrary, he recognized the existence of an authentic kindness, of a truly noble generosity, and the criterion for distinguishing the two is simple and profound. Where does it come from? False kindness comes from lack and from fear. It is the kindness of someone who helps expecting approval, who is nice so as not to be attacked, who gives because they are afraid of losing the other's affection. It is a kindness that, deep down, is self-interested and defensive. It wants something in return: security, acceptance, relief from its own guilt. But there is another kindness which Nietzsche admired, the kindness that overflows from strength. It is the generosity of someone who has so much in energy, in security, in vitality, that they give naturally, without fear and without calculation. Like a full spring that pours water not out of obligation, but because it is overflowing. That person is good not because they fear the consequences of not being, but because their strength is so great that they can afford the luxury of being generous. Their kindness is a sign of power, not of weakness. The sixth truth is inspiring. The highest kindness is not that of the weak person who cannot strike back, but that of the strong person who could crush and chooses not to. This is the only kindness that deserves the name of virtue, because it is a choice, not a necessity. A wolf that decides to be gentle is something entirely different from a sheep that can be nothing else. Seventh and final truth. Become strong first. Only then will your kindness have value. Here we reach the heart of everything. Nietzsche's final message is not be cruel. It is something far more demanding. Become strong enough that your kindness is a choice and not an excuse. Think about the difference. A person who can't hurt anyone and is therefore harmless is not virtuous. They are merely powerless. There is no merit in not doing the evil you have no capacity to do. But a person who has power, who could assert themselves, dominate, strike back, and who nevertheless chooses generosity and compassion, that person possesses a kindness that is truly noble. Because it comes from above, from abundance, and not from below, from lack. That is why Nietzsche said, in essence, first develop your strength. Win the capacity to say no, to assert yourself, to defend yourself, to affirm yourself. Become someone who could, if they wanted to, be hard. And then, from that strength, consciously choose to be good. There, and only there, your kindness stops being a mask of fear and becomes a true virtue. There it has value, because it was chosen by someone who had other options. The seventh truth is the final call. Do not seek to be harmless. Seek to be powerful, and then gentle. Because the gentleness of someone who has no strength is just weakness. But the gentleness of someone who has strength is the highest form of human greatness. And maybe you are not strong yet today. That's okay. The point is not to fake a strength you don't have, but to start building it for real. To learn to say no. To learn to defend yourself. To learn to value yourself. And as that strength grows, your kindness changes its nature. It stops being the hiding place of fear and becomes the signature of someone who chose freely not to use the talons they possess. We have reached the end of our journey. 7 dark truths from Nietzsche about kindness. Let us recap. First, not all kindness is virtue. Much of it is fear with good manners. Second, the morality of the weak was born from resentment, the revenge of the powerless against the strong. Third, you call humility what is often just a lack of courage. Fourth, guilt is the weapon with which the weak tame the strong. Fifth, saying yes to everything is a form of cowardice, and your yes is only worth something if you can say no. Sixth, there is a kindness that comes from strength, not from fear. Seventh, become strong first. Only then will your kindness have value. Nietzsche did not give us these ideas to turn us into cold and cruel people. He gave them to us as a merciless mirror, to tear out of us the comfortable hypocrisy of confusing weakness with virtue. He saw a humanity that had learned to be proud of its own powerlessness, that called morality what was just fear, and that used kindness as an excuse to never have to face life head on. And he offered a harder and more honest path. Become strong, and then be good, not out of cowardice, but out of nobility. Not to dominate others, but to finally become the master of yourself. Because only a strong person can give without losing themselves, and protect without being cruel. If this reflection stirred your self-image, good. The discomfort is the first sign of honesty. Write in the comments, which of these 7 truths hurt the most? The one that made you realize you might be nice out of fear and not out of virtue. I will be reading every single one and answering as many as I can. If this video made you question even your virtues, drop your like. That tells the algorithm there are still people willing to face hard truths about themselves instead of fleeing from them. Subscribe to this channel. It is not for those who seek easy praise. It is for those who are ready to build a real strength, and from it, a kindness that is worth something. Next week, we will return together to the abyss to dissect another hidden mechanism of the human soul. Until then, remember one thing. Kindness is only a virtue when it is a free choice. Before that, It is just the pretty name we give to our own weakness. Go, and become strong enough that your kindness truly means something.